This video is audio content only. It does not contain any video footage or images. If you are expecting visual content, please be aware. This is intentionally provided in an audio-only format. We recommend listening to the audio rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding. Welcome to a journey into the deep past. Today, we explore the sun-scorched badlands of Ethiopia's Ledi-Geraru to uncover a missing chapter in the human story. We'll investigate how ancient volcanic ash and a handful of fossilized teeth have shattered the old March of Progress, revealing a crowded world where our direct ancestors lived alongside mysterious, late-surviving cousins. Join us as we unlock the secrets of this prehistoric neighborhood and discover what it truly meant to be human at the dawn of our genus.
Chapter 1: The Volcanic Clock of Ledi-Geraru. Deep in the Afar region of northeastern Ethiopia, within the Mille district, the Earth is literally tearing itself apart. This is a landscape of extremes, where the African continent is splitting along the East African Rift System, creating a jagged, sun-scorched terrain of faulted badlands. Yet, for those who study the origins of our species, this harsh environment is one of the most precious archives on the planet. For decades, one particular stretch of time has haunted the halls of paleoanthropology, a period of nearly 1 million years that remained stubbornly silent. This is the story of how a specific patch of desert known as the Lee-Adoida Basin in Ledi-Geraru finally broke that silence, using the fiery history of ancient volcanoes to provide a timeline for a missing chapter of the human story. To understand why Ledi-Geraru is so significant, we have to look at the state of the fossil record before these recent discoveries. For a long time, the story of human evolution seemed to have a very clear beginning and a very clear middle, but the transition between the two was a blur. South of Ledi-Geraru lies the famous site of Hadar. This is where the world met Lucy, the iconic representative of the species Australopithecus afarensis. Lucy and her kind were highly successful, flourishing across eastern Africa for nearly 1 million years. We have a wealth of information from this era, including the famous first family, AL333, and the remarkably preserved Dikika child, known as Selim. These fossils represent the known middle of our story, a time when our ancestors walked on 2 legs but retained many ape-like features. But then, around 2.95 million years ago, the trail goes cold. In the fossil record of the Afar, Australopithecus afarensis simply disappears. On the other side of this chronological chasm, starting around 2 million years ago, the record becomes crowded again with the clear emergence of our own genus, Homo, and the robust Paranthropus. What happened in that critical window between 3 million and 2 million years ago has long been obscured by what scholars call a paucity of fossiliferous exposures. This fossil gap exists because the sediments that might hold the answers are either buried too deep, have been eroded away, or were never deposited in the first place. This is where the Ledi-Geraru research project comes in. Launched in 2002, the project set its sights on a specific region north of Hadar, along the drainages of the Ledi and Geraru rivers. These are ephemeral rivers, left tributaries of the Awash that have carved through the sediment to expose layers of earth that haven't seen the sun in millions of years. The geologists and paleoanthropologists on the team realized that Ledi-Geraru was unique because it preserved exactly what the rest of the region was missing: sedimentary packages dating from 2.95 million years ago down to 2.4 million years ago. It was as if a missing volume of a history book had been found on a dusty shelf, but the pages were scattered and out of order. To read those pages, the team needed a way to tell time with absolute precision. In the world of human origins, you cannot simply look at a bone and know its age. You have to look at the rocks surrounding it. At Ledi-Geraru, the landscape provided a series of natural clocks in the form of volcanic ash. Because the Afar is a rift zone, it has been a hotspot of volcanic activity for millions of years.
When these ancient volcanoes erupted, they blanketed the landscape in layers of ash called tephra. These ash falls were catastrophic for the animals living there at the time, but for modern science, they are a blessing. Each volcanic eruption has a unique chemical fingerprint, and more importantly, the ash contains tiny crystals called feldspars. These crystals act like miniature hourglasses. The specific method used at Ledi-Geraru is known as 40AR 39AR single crystal incremental heating, or SCIH. From the moment these crystals are formed in an eruption and cool down, they begin to trap argon gas as a result of the radioactive decay of potassium. By measuring the ratio of different isotopes of argon within a single crystal using the SCIH method, scientists can determine the exact moment that ashfall occurred with incredible precision.
At Ledi-Geraru, these layers of ash or tuffs serve as the bookmarks of time. The researchers identified several key volcanic markers that allowed them to build a chronological framework. One of the most important is the Guru Maha tuff, which was dated to approximately 2.82 million years ago. Just above this layer, the team made one of their most famous early finds, the LD 350-1 mandible, a fossilized jawbone that pushed the origin of our genus, Homo, back by hundreds of thousands of years. But the clock didn't stop there. Higher up in the layers, they identified the Li-Adoita tuffs, dated to about 2.63 million years ago, and the Giddy Sands tuff at approximately 2.59 million years ago. The age control at Ledi-Geraru wasn't just volcanic. It involved a sophisticated combination of techniques. The team also utilized magnetostratigraphy, which involves identifying the orientation of the Earth's magnetic field preserved in the rocks. By identifying the Gauss-chron, a period of normal magnetic polarity, and the transition to the Gauss-Matuyama boundary, they could verify the dates provided by the volcanic crystals. Furthermore, the researchers calculated specific sedimentation rates to refine their estimates. In the Li-Adoita block, they found a sedimentation rate of approximately 14 centimeters per thousand years. This was significantly slower than the 30 centimeters per thousand years seen in the older Hadar Formation, suggesting a different geological pace that allowed for a more compressed but detailed record of time. By sandwiching the fossils between these dated volcanic layers and magnetic boundaries, the researchers could pinpoint the age of their discoveries with a level of certainty that is rare in paleoanthropology. This volcanic clock didn't just provide dates. It allowed the team to reconstruct the pace of change. They could see how the environment shifted over hundreds of thousands of years. The volcanic ash doesn't just date the bones. It seals the environment, preserving the chemical signatures of the world as it existed millions of years ago. The geology of Ledi-Geraru tells a story of a world in transition. The sediments here are composed of finely bedded silts, sandstones, and clays. These suggest that millions of years ago, this wasn't the parched desert we see today. Instead, it was a dynamic system of meandering rivers and shallow lakes. The ancestral Awash River and its tributaries moved across a vegetated landscape, depositing layers of mud and sand that would eventually entomb the remains of the creatures that lived there. However, the layers also show a clear trend toward aridification, providing a high-resolution look at a world becoming drier and more open. The work at Ledi-Geraru is a masterclass in patience and systematic exploration. Finding these fossils involves teams of researchers and local Afar colleagues walking in straight lines across the desert, their eyes glued to the ground, looking for the tiniest fragment of bone or a glint of tooth enamel reflecting the sun. Because the ground is constantly eroding, new fossils are raining out of the hillsides every year. This geological luck is paired with the incredible preservation of the fossils themselves. Because many of the remains were buried in fine silts and volcanic ash, the surface detail on the teeth and bones is often exquisite. The Ledi-Geraru research project has also been a story of human collaboration.
The project relies on the expertise of geologists who can map the complex faults of the Afar, geochronologists who can date the volcanic crystals, and the local Afar people who have an unparalleled ability to spot fossils in the rugged terrain. Two members of the local team, Omar Abdullah and Mohammed Ahmadine Haidara, were instrumental in finding the very specimens that defined this new chapter of our history. Their ability to see a fragment of a premolar amidst a sea of pebbles is a skill that no machine can replicate. Between 2015 and 2018, this meticulous searching led to the recovery of 13 specific teeth that would fundamentally rewrite the story of the fossil gap. The dating of these teeth was essential to proving that the timeline of human evolution was far more complex than previously thought. Using the volcanic tuffs and the 40AR 39AR CI method, the researchers were able to show that these different individuals were present in the same small geographical area within a very narrow window of time. The discovery highlights the importance of the Afar region as a unique laboratory. Because of the way the tectonic plates are moving, the rifting process has acted like a giant excavator, bringing these ancient layers to the surface for us to study. In other parts of Africa, the record from 2.5 million years ago might be buried under hundreds of meters of younger rock. At Ledi-Geraru, the volcanic clock has finally given us the timeline, and the fossils are giving us the characters. The focus now shifts from the timeline to the fossils themselves. If the volcanic clock has told us when these creatures lived, the next task is to understand who they were. Among the 13 teeth recovered, 10 of them belong to a creature that seems to be a ghost in the family tree, a species that looks like an Australopithecus but appeared in the record long after Lucy's kind was thought to have vanished. The successful application of argon-argon dating to these 13 teeth has finally unlocked the timeline, but it has also revealed a shocking biological reality. Who was this mysterious relative, and what does its presence tell us about the diversity of our ancient family?
Chapter 2. The Ghost of Turtle Flat. When we look back at the history of our own origins, we often find ourselves searching for a hero of the story, a single definitive ancestor that bridges the gap between the ancient world of apes and the modern world of humans. For decades, that role was played almost exclusively by Lucy and her species, Australopithecus afarensis. She was the gold standard, the point of departure from which we believed all later humans eventually emerged. But as the sun beats down on the rugged terrain of Ledi-Geraru, researchers have realized that the story has a much larger cast of characters. They have found evidence of a ghost in the family tree, a mysterious relative that doesn't fit into our established categories. This is a species of Australopithecus that was never supposed to be there, existing hundreds of thousands of years after Lucy's kind was thought to have vanished from the Afar region. To understand why this discovery is so disruptive, we have to look at the specific landscape where it was found, an area the research team calls Turtle Flat. Imagine a vast, sun-bleached expanse of desert, where the ground is a mosaic of pebbles, silt, and volcanic debris. In 2018, a team of researchers and local Afar colleagues were walking this landscape, their eyes scanning the ground for the smallest hint of something unusual. It was here that a member of the local team, Omar Abdullah, spotted a single fossilized tooth. It was a premolar, and it was the first clue that a new player had entered the game. The discovery was not a matter of a single lucky find, but the result of an exhaustive, forensic reconstruction of the landscape. Once the first tooth was identified, the team didn't simply pick it up and move on. Instead, they employed a meticulous strategy of flagging every piece of fossil on the landscape. By placing a small flag next to every fragment of bone or tooth across the desert floor, they could visualize the distribution of the remains. This systematic mapping allowed them to see that the fossils weren't just random wash-ins from elsewhere. They were concentrated in a way that suggested a stable, long-term presence. They were reconstructing a 3-million-year-old scene, piece by piece, from the dust. The team eventually recovered a total of 13 teeth from these layers.
While 3 of these teeth belong to the very first representatives of our own genus Homo, the remaining 10 teeth told a different story. These 10 teeth belong to the genus Australopithecus, but they did not belong to a single individual. The dental record revealed that these remains came from at least 2 separate individuals. This is a critical distinction in paleoanthropology. It moves the find from a lone wanderer to a population. It proves that this wasn't a freak occurrence or a single lost soul, but a persistent group of hominins living in the Afar long after their ancestors were thought to have gone extinct. The specific breakdown of these 10 teeth provides a remarkably clear picture of the creature's dental anatomy: 6 molars, 2 incisors, 1 premolar, and 1 canine. The most significant assemblage among these is known as LD 760. Having such a diverse set of teeth from the same species, and in some cases the same individual, is a rare gift. It allows researchers to move beyond guesswork and perform a detailed forensic analysis of the creature's mouth, comparing it to every other known branch of the human family tree. The most striking aspect of these teeth is the date. They are approximately 2.63 million years old. To appreciate the weight of that number, one must understand the 300,000-year silence that had previously haunted the Afar region. Before the work at Ledi-Geraru, there was no definitive evidence of any Australopithecus species in eastern Africa younger than 2.95 million years. For nearly 3 centuries of millennia, the fossil record was mute. Most researchers assumed that by 2.6 million years ago, the lineage that produced Lucy had either evolved into the genus Homo or had simply vanished, unable to cope with a changing world. This ghost species is the sole witness to that era in the Afar, proving that the genus Australopithecus did not disappear, it endured. When scientists compared these teeth to the famous Lucy fossils, the differences were striking and definitive. If you were to look at a molar from Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis, you would notice a very specific shape, a bulging 2-lobed contour on the cheek side that researchers call bilobate. It is a signature trait, a biological fingerprint of her kind. But the teeth from Turtle Flat lacked this bulge entirely. Instead, the lower molars were squarer and more modern in their proportions. The crown of the third premolar also lacked the prominent extension that often skews the tooth's outline in Lucy's kind. These are not merely minor variations, they are the subtle shifts in geometry that signal the presence of a distinct species. The mystery deepened when the team compared the new fossils to another contemporary relative, Australopithecus garhi, which lived in a nearby part of the Afar around 2.5 million years ago. While both belonged to the same genus, they were clearly not the same creature. The upper canine from the Ledi-Geraru individual lacked a specific feature found in garhi, a basin-like structure at the base of the tooth known as a talon. The incisors also showed a different pattern of wear and shape. What the researchers were looking at was a non-robust species of Australopithecus that stood apart from every other known branch of the family tree. It was a slender, gracile creature that had maintained the basic body plan of its ancestors while refining its dental anatomy for a new era.
This distinctiveness has led to a proposed designation in paleoanthropological discourse, Australopithecus geraru. While the official scientific paper left the species unnamed, the term has been staked to describe this specific lineage. Whether it eventually receives this formal name or remains a ghost, its presence fundamentally changes our understanding of the timeline. It shows that the gracile body plan, the more slender, generalized anatomy that we usually associate with the human line, was more widespread and persistent than we ever imagined. It wasn't just a stepping stone to the future. It was a successful design that continued to exist in its own right. The existence of this species forces a confrontation with the limits of our knowledge. We are used to seeing the history of our ancestors as a clear chronological progression, but the ghost of Turtle Flat suggests a much more complex reality.
This creature was living in the Afar during a period of massive environmental upheaval, surviving in a world that was becoming increasingly harsh and unpredictable. It represents a lineage that defied the odds, persisting for hundreds of thousands of years in a landscape that many believed had already been surrendered to newer, more advanced species. The researchers are cautious about the next steps. While the 10 teeth provide overwhelming evidence that this creature is unique, they are still searching for the type specimen that would allow for a full formal description. They are looking for more than just dental records. They are searching for a skull fragment that could tell us about brain size, or a limb bone that could reveal how it moved through the desert. Until those pieces are found, this relative remains a presence we can feel and measure, but one that we cannot yet fully see. The discovery of these teeth at Turtle Flat has effectively reopened a cold case in human evolution. It has filled a 300,000-year gap and introduced a new character into a story we thought we already knew. But the presence of this ghost raises a question that the teeth alone cannot answer. If this unnamed Australopithecus was still thriving 2.63 million years ago, it wasn't alone in the desert. In the very same layers of sediment just a few meters away, the team found the remains of the very first members of our own genus. What happens to our understanding of the human story when we realize that our direct ancestors were sharing the same riverbanks with this late surviving ghost?
Chapter 3: The Crowded Neighborhood. The Ledi-Geraru research project has transformed our understanding of the Afar region from a simple graveyard of ancestors into a high-resolution map of a living community. While other sites offer glimpses of isolated species, Ledi-Geraru provides the physical evidence of symmetry, the biological reality of different hominin species occupying the same landscape at the same time. This discovery moves the narrative away from a lonely, linear path and into the bustling, high-stakes environment of a shared neighborhood. The evidence is not found in grand skeletons, but in the precise spatial and anatomical data of 13 fossilized teeth and a handful of jaw fragments. The physical proximity of these finds is perhaps the most striking evidence of this shared world. In the Ledi-Geraru region, the spatial relationship between fossils is measured in meters rather than kilometers. For instance, the specimen known as LD 302-23, a mandibular right third premolar, was recovered just 22 meters southwest and 7 meters stratigraphically below the site of the famous LD 350-1 homomandible. In the vastness of the Ethiopian desert, this is the equivalent of finding two different families living in the same apartment building. This specific spatial detail, recorded by the sharp eyes of local Afar finders like Omar Abdullah and Mohammed Ahmededdin Hayara, makes the neighborhood metaphor concrete. These individuals weren't just living in the same region, they were walking the same narrow strips of land along the ancestral Ledi River. To confirm that these neighbors belong to different lineages, researchers rely on technical dental markers that distinguish the genus Homo from its Australopithecus contemporaries. The Homo specimens, including the LD 302-23 premolar and the AS 100 molars from the Asboli region, exhibit a distinct mesiodistal compression. This narrowing of the teeth is a hallmark of our lineage, representing a move away from the broader, more primitive dental proportions of our ancestors. These teeth also show a more symmetrical occlusal profile and a refined cusp pattern, particularly in the development of the talonid, the crushing posterior portion of the lower molar. In contrast, the teeth belonging to the Ledi-Geraru Australopithecus, such as the LD 760 assemblage, retain a different set of picky details. When compared to earlier species like Lucy's kind, these teeth are evaluated against the bilobate buccal contour, a specific two-lobed bulging on the cheek side of the molars that characterizes more primitive hominins. While the Ledi-Geraru Australopithecus shows some modernization, its squarer proportions and robust enamel distinguish it clearly from the compressed, slender anatomy of the Homo specimens, found just meters away.
These are not variations within a single population. They are the distinct anatomical signatures of two separate evolutionary experiments occurring simultaneously.
The timeline of this coexistence is remarkably tight. The Ledi-Geraru record shows a persistent Homo presence at 2.78 million years ago, and again at 2.59 million years ago. Sandwiched precisely between these dates, at 2.63 million years ago, are the remains of the unnamed Australopithecine species. This chronological sandwich proves that for at least 200,000 years, these two lineages were contemporaries. They shared the same riverine forests and open grasslands, likely encountering one another as they navigated the mosaic environment of the ancient Afar. This neighborhood was even more crowded than initially suspected. For years, the Afar was thought to be a non-robust laboratory, a region where the heavy-jawed Paranthropus was absent, leaving the landscape to the more slender, gracile hominins. However, a 2026 discovery has overturned this assumption. A team led by the University of Chicago recovered a 2.6 million-year-old Paranthropus jaw in the Afar, proving that the Nutcracker lineage was also part of the regional community. While Paranthropus has not yet been found in the specific stratigraphic layers of Ledi-Geraru, its presence in the broader Afar during the same window of time means that early Homo and the Ledi-Geraru Australopithecines were part of an even more complex social and ecological web. The biological tension of sympatry raises fundamental questions about how these species managed to exist in such close proximity. While they likely partitioned their resources to avoid direct competition, the sheer fact of their overlap suggests a landscape of constant interaction. They were not abstract branches on a chart, they were living populations that had to distinguish themselves from their cousins through behavior, diet, and habitat preference. The Afar 2.6 million years ago was a place of intense biological conversation, where the presence of one species inevitably influenced the evolutionary trajectory of the others. This reality of parallel lives forces a shift in focus. We can no longer look at the emergence of the genus Homo as a solitary event. Instead, we must view it as a survival story within a crowded field. The 13 teeth of Ledi-Geraru are the silent witnesses to this era of overlap, proving that our ancestors were never alone. They were one of several upright walking experiments, each navigating the same challenges of a shifting climate and a dangerous landscape. As we look closer at the anatomical differences between these neighbors, we begin to see the specific traits that allowed them to share the same square meters of Earth. What were the specific environmental pressures that allowed such a diverse community to thrive in the Afar? And how did the presence of these different relatives shape the very traits we now consider uniquely human? Chapter 4. A Forest of Ancestors.
For nearly 60 years, a single image has dominated the public's understanding of human origins. You have seen it on T-shirts, in textbooks, and on countless posters. The March of Progress. This iconic silhouette begins with a hunched ape-like figure on the left, followed by a series of increasingly upright ancestors, each one a little taller and more human than the last, culminating in the modern human stride. It is a powerful, elegant graphic, but the discoveries at Ledi-Geraru have acted like a sledgehammer to this neat, orderly ladder. The fossil record emerging from the Afar region tells us that this image is not just an oversimplification, it is fundamentally wrong. Our history was never a single-file march. It was a chaotic, vibrant, and crowded explosion of life. A bushy tree filled with experimental branches, many of which were dead ends. To understand why Ledi-Geraru is so disruptive to the old model, we must look beyond the Afar. The bushy nature of our tree wasn't just a local phenomenon, it was a continental reality. Far to the west, in the windswept deserts of Chad, researchers discovered Australopithecus bahrelghasali. Its presence, thousands of kilometers away from the Great Rift Valley, proves that hominin diversity was widespread. By 3 million years ago, the genus Australopithecus wasn't just a single lineage slowly morphing into humans. It was a successful Pan-African group of species exploring different environments simultaneously. The most shattering blow to the latter model, however, comes from a radical rethinking of our direct lineage. For decades, Lucy and her species, Australopithecus afarensis, were the undisputed mothers of humanity. The latter was simple. Afarensis led to Homo. But recent analysis, including findings published in 2025, suggests a much more tangled web. There is a growing possibility that A. afarensis was actually a highly specialized side branch, a successful evolutionary cousin rather than a grandmother. Instead, the path to humanity may have bypassed Lucy entirely, with the much older Australopithecus anamensis giving rise to a different lineage, such as Australopithecus deyerameta, which then transitioned into the genus Homo. In this model, Lucy's kind disappears from the record around 2.95 million years ago, not because they evolved into us, but because they hit an evolutionary wall while other, more obscure relatives moved forward. The fossils at Ledi-Geraru provide the physical evidence for this messy, non-linear transition. Their true value lies in their mosaic nature. They are biological chimeras. The LD 350:1 mandible, for instance, is not a perfect human jaw. It is a snapshot of nature in the middle of a massive experiment. It possesses a symphyseal keel and subparallel margins, traits that are hallmarks of the genus Homo. Yet, it also retains an inclined symphyseal cross-section, a primitive feature straight out of the Australopithecus playbook. This isn't a story of one species turning into another. It is a story of nature running multiple experiments simultaneously to see what worked in a rapidly changing world. Between 3.0 and 2.5 million years ago, there was no single human ancestor. There was a forest of branches. During this critical window, we now know there were at least 4 distinct lineages of hominins living in the same general region: our own genus Homo, the robust, heavy-jawed Paranthropus, the enigmatic Australopithecus garhi, and the newly identified Australopithecus geraru. The march of progress implies that evolution had a goal, as if it were trying to reach us. But the fossils suggest that evolution was actually throwing everything at the wall. It was testing out different jaw structures, different tooth sizes, and different ways of interacting with a world that was becoming a pressure cooker of natural selection. The bushy tree we see at Ledi-Geraru is the physical evidence of that struggle for adaptation. One version, the Homo line, eventually developed the flexibility to survive. Another version, Australopithecus geraru, persisted for hundreds of thousands of years before eventually vanishing. This bushy model of evolution also changes how we think about extinction. In the latter model, extinction is seen as a sign of failure, a species that simply wasn't advanced enough to keep up. But in the experimental model, extinction is a natural and frequent part of a healthy, diversifying ecosystem. These dead ends in our family tree weren't failures. They were successful, thriving populations that lived for hundreds of thousands of years. Their eventual disappearance doesn't mean they were lesser than our ancestors. It simply means that when the environment shifted, their specific experimental design no longer fit the world. The coexistence of these multiple lineages also forces us to reconsider the idea of human itself. When we look at the 2.8 million-year-old jawbone from Ledi-Geraru, we see a creature that is clearly on the path to becoming us, yet it still retains the features of a more primitive ancestor. If you were to see this creature alongside Australopithecus geraru, the differences might have been subtle. They both walked upright. They were both roughly the same size. They both navigated the same dangerous landscape. The human lineage was just one of several similar experiments happening at the same time. We only look unique now because we are the only ones left. For most of our history, being a hominin was a shared experience.
This diversity also raises the possibility of interspecies interaction on a level we are only beginning to imagine. In a linear model, there is no interaction because the species don't overlap. But in a bushy tree, interaction is a certainty. We have to wonder if these different lineages were aware of each other. The spatial proximity of the finds at Ledi-Geraru is startling. Different species have been recovered from the same geological layers. They were using the same riverbanks and foraging in the same groves. This crowded reality would have created a constant pressure to innovate. If you are sharing a riverbank with a cousin who is eating the same fruits you are, there is a massive evolutionary advantage to finding a new food source that they can't access. This competitive environment might be the very reason our genus, Homo, survived while the others didn't. The bushy tree wasn't just a collection of species, it was a competitive arena. The traits we consider most human, our larger brains, our technological ingenuity, our dietary flexibility, may have been forged not in isolation, but in the heat of competition with our close relatives. We didn't become human because it was our destiny. We became human because we were part of a diverse experimental community where innovation was the only way to stay ahead.
The Ledi-Geraru finds also highlight the taxonomic difficulty of this bushy reality. In a linear model, naming a species is easy. You just find where it fits on the line. But when you have multiple overlapping lineages with mosaic features, the boundaries become blurred. This is why researchers have been so cautious about naming the new Australopithecus species. They recognize that they are looking at a complex web of life where traits are being shared, modified, and lost in different combinations. The ghost species of Ledi-Geraru is a reminder that our current categories might be too rigid to capture the fluid, experimental nature of our past. The march of progress implies a sense of inevitability, as if the modern human form were the correct answer to a problem. But the bushy tree of Ledi-Geraru suggests that there were many correct answers. The robust Paranthropus was a perfectly valid answer to the problem of a drying climate, as was Australopithecus geraru. They were all successful for immense periods of time. Our own lineage was just one of the many experiments that nature ran, and our survival was not guaranteed. We were the twig that happened to persist through a series of environmental filters that claimed our cousins. This perspective brings a certain humility to our understanding of human origins. It reminds us that we are the survivors of a much larger, more diverse family. We aren't the pinnacle of a ladder, we are the last remaining branch of a once great forest. The fossils at Ledi-Geraru are the traces of those other branches, the failed experiments that were actually our contemporaries and competitors. They are a testament to the incredible creativity of the evolutionary process. By shattering the ladder, these discoveries have given us something much more valuable, a more accurate, more complex, and more fascinating view of our own origins. We can finally see our ancestors not as lonely pioneers, but as members of a diverse and thriving community of relatives. But if these multiple species were truly sharing the same landscape, the most pressing question remains: how did they actually do it? In a world of limited resources and a drying climate, how could different types of upright walking apes live side by side without one immediately driving the others to extinction?
Chapter 5: The Chemical Archive of Survival. The fossilized remains recovered from the Ledi-Geraru sediments are more than just anatomical puzzles. They are biological hard drives, preserving a chemical record of every meal, every drought, and every environmental shift encountered by our ancestors. While the shape of a jaw can tell us who an individual was, the microscopic and isotopic signatures locked within their tooth enamel tell us how they lived. By interrogating these specimens at the molecular level, scientists are moving beyond simple descriptions of bone and into the visceral reality of survival in a world that was rapidly losing its forests. To understand the dietary pressures facing these hominins, we must first look at the animals that lived alongside them. In the layers of the Liadoita and Giddy sands, the research team has identified a massive community of bovids, the family that includes antelopes and ancient cattle. These creatures act as high-fidelity environmental sensors. By analyzing the specific tribes of bovids present, such as the Alcelaphini and Antilopini, researchers have confirmed a landscape dominated by open, grassy plains. These tribes are the same ones found today in the Serengeti, specialized for life in hot, sunny, and highly seasonal environments. The dental microwear on these bovid teeth, the microscopic scratches and pits left by their last few weeks of life, reveals a clear preference for C4 grasses, proving that the green carpet of the Afar was becoming increasingly tough and abrasive.
In this shifting landscape, the dietary strategy of Australopithecus geraru was remarkably conservative. Stable isotope analysis of the carbon locked in their enamel shows a persistent reliance on C3 resources, the fruits, leaves, and seeds found in the shrinking riverine forests. While the world around them was turning to grass, this lineage remained tethered to the trees. However, the teeth reveal a fascinating and specific detail about their eating habits: the presence of non-carious cervical lesions. These are distinct patterns of wear at the base of the tooth crown caused by acid erosion. This suggests that Australopithecus geraru was consuming high quantities of acidic fruits, perhaps focusing on specific forest resources that required a specialized metabolism to process. This fruit-heavy diet was supplemented by fallback foods that allowed the species to survive when the preferred forests failed. The dental anatomy of these individuals features exceptionally thick enamel, a physical adaptation to the gritty reality of life on the ground. When the lush fruits of the wet season vanished, they likely turned to tubers, nuts, and cereal grains. These foods were often covered in gritty dirt and dust, which would have decimated thinner enameled teeth. This thick protective layer acted as an evolutionary insurance policy, allowing Australopithecus geraru to grind through tough abrasive starches that other primates could not digest. The nitrogen isotope ratios in these teeth provide perhaps the most definitive evidence of their ecological niche. By comparing the Ledi-Geraru signatures to those found at other major sites, researchers have noted a striking similarity to the Australopithecines populations of Sterkfontein. The data indicates that Australopithecus geraru was almost entirely vegetarian. Unlike the members of the genus Homo who were beginning to experiment with animal proteins, this late surviving Australopith showed no chemical evidence of substantial mammalian meat consumption. They were the ultimate forest specialists, refining a vegetarian strategy that had served their ancestors for millions of years. In contrast, the teeth of early Homo found in the same layers tell a story of radical flexibility. While they continued to consume C3 plants, their isotopic signatures show a much wider range, indicating they were beginning to exploit the expanding C4 grasslands. This shift was likely driven by the consumption of meat and marrow. The ability to use stone tools to access the high-calorie tissues of carcasses provided Homo with a resource that was entirely off-limits to Australopithecus geraru. This wasn't just a change in diet, it was a change in the fundamental energy budget of the species. By incorporating animal fat and protein, early Homo could support the high metabolic costs of a growing brain while reducing the amount of time spent chewing tough plant matter. This divergence in diet is the key to understanding niche partitioning in the Afar. We can now envision a cinematic scene of coexistence. During a harsh dry season, a group of Australopithecus geraru might be found clustered along the banks of the ancestral Ledi River, using their powerful jaws and thick enamel to process gritty tubers dug from the drying mud. Just a few hundred meters away, a small band of early Homo might be scavenging the remains of a bovid kill on the edge of the open savanna, using sharp flakes to slice through hide. They were neighbors who shared a landscape but occupied different worlds of nutrition. By targeting different resources, they avoided the head-to-head competition that would have led to the immediate extinction of one group. The teeth also record the stress events that defined these lives.
Within the enamel are microscopic growth lines similar to the rings of a tree, which record the pace of development. In many of the Ledi-Geraru specimens, these lines show disruptions that correspond to periods of intense physiological stress, likely the result of the increasing seasonality of the afar. A particularly long dry season or a multi-year drought would leave a permanent scar in the developing tooth of a child. These bad years were frequent, suggesting that both lineages were living on the edge of their environmental tolerance, constantly forced to adapt to a climate that was becoming more unpredictable.
A major technological milestone in 2025 and 2026 has added a new dimension to this reconstruction: the successful extraction of ancient proteins from an Australopithecus tooth. This field, known as paleoproteomics, allows scientists to look past the minerals and into the very proteins that built the individual. These molecular fossils are far more resilient than DNA and have provided the first direct evidence of the genetic affinities of Australopithecus geraru. Preliminary results suggest that this lineage possessed unique protein sequences related to digestive enzymes, further supporting the idea that they were highly specialized for a specific plant-based diet that differed from both their ancestors and their Homo contemporaries. This dietary specialization may explain why certain groups are missing from the Ledi-Geraru record. While the robust Paranthropus was flourishing in other parts of Africa, their absence here suggests that Australopithecus geraru had already locked down the niche for heavy plant processing. By being the first to adapt to the specific tubers and acidic fruits of the northern rift, this ghost lineage may have effectively blocked the expansion of Paranthropus into the afar for hundreds of thousands of years. They were not just passive residents, they were active competitors who shaped the community around them. The chemical and microscopic evidence from Ledi-Geraru reveals a world where survival was a matter of precision. One lineage doubled down on the ancient traditions of the forest, protected by thick enamel and a specialized gut, while the other looked toward the horizon and the untapped potential of the grasslands. Both strategies worked for a time, allowing two very different ways of being a hominin to persist side by side in a crowded neighborhood. But as the climate continued its relentless march toward aridity, the limits of these strategies would eventually be tested. If Australopithecus geraru was so well adapted to its riverine niche, what finally tipped the balance in favor of the innovators? The discoveries at Ledi-Geraru have fundamentally reshaped our understanding of the human story. By bridging a critical 300,000-year gap, these fossils have replaced the ladder of progress with a vibrant, crowded, bushy tree. We now see that our ancestors were not lonely pioneers, but neighbors to a mysterious, late-surviving Australopithecus lineage. This coexistence proves that evolution was a period of intense experimentation, where different species navigated a drying landscape through unique survival strategies. The ghost of Turtle Flat reminds us that being human was once a shared experience, and our survival was never a guaranteed destiny. We are simply the last remaining branch of a once vast forest of relatives. As we continue to uncover these ancient secrets, we must ask, if our cousins were so well adapted, what truly made us the ones to endure? Thank you for listening.